Night was beginning to shed the last lights of day when Liv, with a daring smile and a gleam in her eyes, turned to her friends, Bram and Martin. The gentle wind blowing in Zandvoort seemed to be in tune with her excitement, while stories of hauntings and mysteries of the old Huis van Verlangen mansion echoed in their minds. It was an irresistible invitation for an adventure, and Liv knew she needed to convince them to go. "Come on, it's just an old mansion. What could go wrong?" said Liv with a challenging tone. Bram hesitated, looking at Martin, who seemed even more undecided. The idea of exploring a place surrounded by rumors of ghosts and tragedies wasn't exactly how they wished to spend the night. However, Liv's determination was contagious, and soon the stories that once seemed like mere legends began to come alive in the boys' minds. "You know they say the last family who lived there disappeared without a trace, don't you?" commented Bram, trying to inject some apprehension into the conversation. "And that their daughter still haunts the corridors, crying for her mother." "Ah, you're just trying to scare me," Liv replied, with a laugh that echoed into the night. "If this isn't a sign that we should go, I don't know what else could be." Martin, for his part, looked at the ground, losing himself in deep thoughts. Curiosity was present, but there was a shadow that accompanied him, a weight he couldn't ignore. Finally, Liv's determination prevailed, and the three friends headed to the mansion. As they approached the rusty gate, a sense of expectation began to hang in the air. The sound of metal creaking as it opened seemed to echo in their hearts. The atmosphere around Huis van Verlangen was dense, almost palpable. The trees around seemed to lean, as if whispering ancient secrets. Each step they took toward the entrance was accompanied by the sound of their own racing hearts. Excitement and fear mixed in their minds, creating a symphony of contradictory feelings. Inside the mansion, darkness enveloped them like a cloak. The smell of mold and rotting wood invaded their nostrils, causing their stomachs to contract. An inexplicable cold seemed to permeate the environment, and the echoes of their voices were the only sounds to be heard. The first room they found was a dusty library, filled with books that seemed to have been forgotten by time. The shelves, covered by a thin layer of dust, stood like guardians of ancient secrets. "Look at this," Liv exclaimed, pointing to a dusty photograph resting on a table in the center of the room. The image showed a family on a sunny day, with smiles that seemed alive despite the time. But as they approached, a strange sensation enveloped them. The faces in the photograph seemed somehow to be watching them. A shiver ran down Martin's spine, and he backed away, feeling an inexplicable connection with those people he had never met. "This is strange," murmured Bram, as he examined the photograph more closely. Liv and Martin exchanged glances, both feeling the same uneasiness. The mansion wasn't just an abandoned place, but a repository of stories and memories that clamored for attention. They were about to discover that those echoes of pain and sadness were intertwined with their own lives in ways they never imagined. The heavy atmosphere of the library enveloped them, while curiosity and fear mingled in a silent dance. What else did Huis van Verlangen hold, and what secrets were yet to be revealed? The questions hung in the air, creating an expectation that pulsed in their hearts. Little did they know, they were just at the beginning of a journey that would force them to face not only the mysteries of the mansion, but also the ghosts that inhabited their own souls. As they explored the mansion, Liv, Bram, and Martin moved away from the dusty library and continued onward, guided by a mixture of curiosity and fear. The echoes of their footsteps resonated through the dark corridors, creating a symphony of mystery that seemed to envelop the already dense atmosphere of that place. With each door that opened, a new fragment of the past emerged, but nothing could prepare them for what they would find next. Upon entering a dusty room, the heavy air and accumulated dust revealed the abandonment that reigned there. The smell of mold and deteriorated wood invaded their nostrils, a constant reminder of the time that had passed since someone had stepped into that space. In the corner, an old table was covered by a thick layer of dust, but something caught Martin's attention: a diary, partially hidden under a pile of forgotten objects. With a hesitant gesture, he removed it, feeling the worn texture of the cover between his fingers. curiosity soon transformed into an irresistible impulse. With his friends by his side, Martin opened the diary and began to read aloud. The words recorded on the yellowed pages revealed the pain of a mother who, in her core, carried a deep grief for the loss of her daughter. The woman's sadness overflowed in each phrase, her emotions written with a sincerity that cut to the heart. "What I would do for one last look, one last embrace," he read, his voice trembling. As Martin read, Liv and Bram felt the atmosphere around them transform. The pain expressed in the pages seemed to connect with their own experiences, forming an emotional web that united them in an unexpected way. Liv's eyes filled with tears as she imagined the anguish of that mother, and she remembered moments when she too had lost loved ones. The feelings of sadness, loneliness, and despair reverberated in their hearts, emerging like shadows that danced around them. Bram, for his part, felt a knot form in his throat. He had always had difficulty dealing with his own losses, and that account touched a wound he tried to keep covered. "It's incredible how pain can be so universal," he murmured, looking at his friends, who now shared a deep understanding, a silent recognition that all of them were somehow dealing with their own tragedies. The reading of the diary continued, revealing memories of happy moments before the tragedy, like shared laughter and dreams of a future that never materialized. The story resonated with the reality of each of them, as if the mother's pain was an echo of their own lives. A connection formed between the friends, an invisible bond that united them in the face of the pain they shared. With a heavy heart, Martin closed the diary, the reality of what he had just read weighing on his mind. He looked at Liv and Bram, his eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and determination. "We need to go beyond this," he said, his voice firm but laden with emotion. "We can't let fear stop us from discovering what else is hidden here." The three exchanged glances, tension building as they approached the door of a sealed room which seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Curiosity and apprehension mingled, and Liv, with a surge of courage, decided they should enter. "We can't run from the shadows of the past," she declared, her voice firm. "We need to face them." With a nod, the friends agreed, and together they moved toward the door. The sound of their deep breaths filled the silence as Martin extended his hand to the doorknob, his heart beating erratically. The feeling that something deep and painful awaited them beyond that door was palpable, but the determination to discover the truth propelled them. They were ready to face whatever that place was hiding, willing to confront the ghosts, not only of the mansion, but also of their own lives. The door of the sealed room creaked as it was pushed open, revealing a space wrapped in an almost sacred silence. The dim light entering through a dust-covered window illuminated a scene that seemed to have been frozen in time. Old toys were scattered across the floor. Some porcelain dolls with empty gazes seemed to watch the entrance, while unsent letters, yellowed and worn, lay on a dust-covered table. The environment exhaled a silent lament, a memorial of pain that touched the heart of everyone there. Liev was the first to enter, and her eyes shone with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. The image of the room seemed to echo the stories they had heard about the mansion. Each toy, each letter, was a piece of a past that clamored to be heard. The smell of aged wood and the heavy air became a tangible reminder that there was a life before the solitude. The trio, although still hesitant, felt the gravity of the situation. Martin, observing a wooden cart leaning in a corner, froze. The wood was worn, but still carried the warmth of memories. It was the cart his mother had given him when he was a child. A knot formed in his throat as he remembered her smile watching him play. Tears began to fill his eyes, and he questioned whether the emotions of the past could really be overcome, or if, like that cart, they would remain dusty somewhere in his being. Liev, noticing the change in Martin's expression, approached delicately. She extended her hand to touch his shoulder, but hesitated, fearing that any movement might break the fragility of the moment. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper, but Martin didn't respond. He remained fixed on the cart, as if time had stopped, and the pain of an unresolved past began to overflow. Bram, meanwhile, explored the rest of the room, his eyes fixed on a corner where a porcelain doll had fallen, its features still intact, even after years of abandonment. He picked it up, feeling the cold of the material against his palms. "This doll seems so real," he murmured, and for a brief moment felt that the child who owned it was still present in some way. Leave, hearing Bram's voice, turned and saw how the doll reflected an infinite sadness. The room was not just a physical space, it was a repository of memories, an echo of a lost childhood. As Martin struggled with his memories, Leave and Bram exchanged glances, sharing the awareness that they were not just exploring the mansion, but also confronting their own ghosts. The room seemed to be alive, pulsing with the pain and longing of all who had lived there. Each object they touched carried with it a story of loss, of love, and of a struggle for acceptance. "We should open those letters," suggested Liev, with a trembling voice breaking the silence. The unsent letters seemed to contain secrets that yearned to be revealed. As they approached the table, the atmosphere became increasingly dense, as if the walls were listening and waiting. The letters were tied with a faded thread, and as soon as Liev untied them, a current of cold air ran through the environment. As she began to read aloud, the other two listened attentively. The words revealed the pain of a mother, a woman who had lost her daughter in tragic and inexplicable circumstances. Each phrase was a silent cry of despair, and Martin, listening, felt his heart tighten. It was as if the woman was speaking directly to him, sharing her pain in a visceral way. He was not alone. There were other souls who also carried the weight of loss. Tears began to slip down Martin's face, and he allowed himself to feel the sadness he had kept for so long. The emotional connection that formed between them was palpable, and in this dusty room, surrounded by toys and letters, the three friends were united not only by exploration, but by understanding their own pain. Grief, which before seemed a solitary burden, now became a shared experience, a bond that united them in a difficult but necessary journey. However, the atmosphere was about to change. The sound of a distant creak echoed through the corridor, breaking the moment of introspection. The three exchanged glances, fear and curiosity mixing in their eyes. What else could be hidden in that mansion? What else could emerge from the shadows of the past? And more importantly, were they ready to face whatever was waiting? The atmosphere in the Huis van Verlangen mansion became increasingly oppressive as Martin's emotions emerged to the surface. He was paralyzed in front of the mirror, lost in a sea of memories that consumed him. Liev and Bram, perceiving the intensity of his suffering, tried to approach, but the pain emanating from Martin was almost tangible, as if a magnetic field kept him trapped in that place. Lieve, with a heavy heart, looked at her friends. The sadness in Martin's eyes reflected a vulnerability she had never seen before. He was fighting against ghosts that were not only from the mansion, but also from his own life. The silence that hung in the room seemed to amplify his thoughts, transforming into a dissonant music of unresolved memories. "Bram," Liev murmured with a thread of voice, "what do we do now?" She knew it wasn't just about the mansion, but about the pain that each of them carried. Bram, observing his friend, felt it was time to share his own story. He knew that if Martin was willing to open his heart, perhaps he could alleviate some of the burden they all carried. "I lost someone too," Bram began, his voice low but firm. "My brother, he died in a car accident. I was there, and I couldn't do anything to help him." The words came out as a painful whisper, and Liev felt a chill down her spine. The guilt that accompanied Bram's declaration was palpable, as if the walls of the mansion absorbed every fragment of pain. "And I always wondered if I could have done something different," Bram continued, looking at the floor, as if the wooden boards could offer consolation. "The truth is that even knowing it wasn't my fault, the pain of loss has always been with me. Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve to be happy after what happened." Martin, still in a state of shock, began to listen. He was not alone. Bram's words opened a window to his own pain, showing that grief was not a solitary path, but a road they could all travel together. "I didn't know you felt that way," Liev commented, her eyes shining with contained tears. "I lost my grandfather a few years ago. He was everything to me. I never imagined that pain could be so deep." Leave's vulnerability brought a new weight to the conversation. They were all connected by their losses, forming an invisible bond that united them in that dark moment. The silence that followed was heavy, but no longer suffocating. It was a silence of understanding, a moment where words were not necessary, only each other's presence. The room, previously just a space full of dusty objects and shadows, now seemed to pulse with emotions that were on the surface. Martin finally moved away from the mirror as if he had been freed from a spell. He looked at his friends and saw in them not just adventure companions, but allies in the battle against their own pain. "I always thought I had to deal with this alone," he said, his voice trembling but stronger now. "But now I see that's not the case. We have each other." Liev smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "That's what friends do, Martin. We support each other, even in the most difficult hours." Bram, in a gesture of support, placed his hand on Martin's shoulder. "And even if we can't erase the pain, we can learn to live with it. That's how we honor those we loved and lost." As they spoke, the atmosphere in the mansion began to change. The shadows no longer seemed so threatening. There was a sense of hope that was beginning to sprout between them, a faint light amid the darkness. The emotional connection that had been forged in that moment became a shield against the weight of the past. Martin, now more aware of his emotions, stepped forward, determined to seek answers. "We need to know more about this family who lived here. Perhaps we can find some way to understand our pain by discovering theirs." The friends agreed, and together they decided they needed to explore more of the mansion, hoping that the stories that dwelled there might offer some kind of consolation. Grief would no longer be a solitary burden. They would face together the truths that Huis van Verlangen had to reveal. As they left the sealed room, the heavy atmosphere continued to hover over Liev, Bram, and Martin. The air was charged with a dense silence, almost palpable, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. Martin, in particular, felt more vulnerable than ever. The emotions that had emerged during the exploration of the room, the pain of the mother from the diary, the memories of his own childhood, were now entangled in his heart, weighing like an anchor. The three friends gathered in one of the neighboring rooms, a space that, although worn by time, still maintained a certain nostalgic beauty. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, and the furniture, covered in dust, seemed to whisper stories of the past. The light, filtered through broken windows, created dancing patterns on the floor, but the beauty was overshadowed by the sadness that permeated the room. No one seemed willing to break the silence, until Liev, with a soft voice, began to talk about how memories shape who we are. "Sometimes I wonder if we can really leave the past behind," she said, her eyes shining with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Or if it continues to follow us, like shadows we can't see." Bram, who was sitting in a creaking chair, nodded slowly. He too struggled with his own memories, but didn't know how to put them into words. Martin observed his friends, feeling the weight of the conversation intensify. It was as if they were all stripping off their armor, revealing vulnerabilities they normally hid. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from their personal stories to deeper reflections on life and death. Liev spoke about her grandfather, the pain she felt at losing someone so close. "He always said that life is a cycle and that each end brings a new beginning. But sometimes I wonder where that new beginning is when all I feel is his absence." Her voice trembled, but there was an underlying strength in her vulnerability. Bram, for his part, shared memories of his brother, revealing how guilt consumed him. "I should have done more. I never understood why he had to go away," he confessed, with tears in his eyes. Hearing this, Martin felt completely exposed. He knew his friend's pain was real, but at the same time felt that his own struggle was unique and isolated. The grief he carried for his mother seemed an unbearable burden, and the idea of sharing it left him paralyzed. But looking at Liev and Bram, he realized they too were facing their own battles. It was a strange connection, a bond formed not only by friendship, but by shared pain. However, the atmosphere of camaraderie was abruptly broken by a sinister noise coming from upstairs. A distant crash, followed by the sound of something dragging across the floor, made all three exchange glances, fear and curiosity reflected in their eyes. The room, which before was a refuge for their emotions, had now become a space of unease. "Did you hear that?" Martin asked, his voice trembling. The tension was palpable, and a wave of adrenaline ran through the group. Liev, who had had always been the boldest, took the lead. "We should investigate. It might just be the wind, but what if it's something more?" The idea of remaining there, surrounded by the unknown, seemed unbearable. Bram hesitated, but Liev's determination influenced him. They were in this together, and fear could not separate them. With racing hearts, the trio began to climb the creaking stairs. Each step seemed a challenge, echoing not only in their ears, but in their hearts. The walls around seemed to close in, and the shadows danced in a disturbing way, as if the house itself was alive. The conversations about their memories and grief seemed distant now, replaced by the urgency to discover what was happening upstairs. The sound continued, a distant whisper that guided them while also terrifying them. They knew they needed to face whatever was waiting for them. After all, the Huis van Verlangen mansion was not just a place of sad stories. It was also a labyrinth of mysteries that demanded to be unraveled. And perhaps in the search for answers, they could finally confront their own ghosts, those that followed them in their lives like shadows that refused to disappear. Liev's heart beat strongly as the three friends climbed the creaking stairs of the mansion, each step resonating like an echo of their own fears and hopes. The atmosphere around them was heavy, mixing the smell of mold and humidity with the distant perfume of forgotten memories. The sound that had attracted them to that upper floor now seemed like a call, a summons they could not ignore. Liev led the way, an impulse of courage guiding her, while Bram and Martin followed, visibly nervous but determined. Upon reaching the upstairs corridor, a faint light emanated from a half-open door. The flickering light cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating a scene that seemed straight out of a nightmare. Fear mingled with an almost uncontrollable curiosity, and Liev, without hesitation, pushed the door open, revealing a room full of broken mirrors. The distorted reflections of their faces created a sense of disorientation, as if each of them was seeing themselves in a new light, a new perspective that challenged their realities. In the center of the room, an old full-length mirror was still intact. The gleaming surface reflected Martin's image, and as he stared at it, an overwhelming emotion took hold of him. It wasn't just his own reflection he saw, but the image of his mother smiling at him, as if she were there, alive and present. The shock caused him to freeze, his heart racing and his mind flooded with memories he had tried to bury. The memories of his childhood, of the moments they spent together, of the pain of her loss, all came back with devastating force. Liev and Bram, sensing the intensity of the moment, tried to pull him away from the mirror, but Martin resisted, trapped in his own pain. He wanted to scream, wanted to cry, but the words failed to escape. The mirror seemed to have become a portal to the past, and his mother's presence was so vivid that he couldn't turn away. The weight of grief he carried became heavier, a burden he didn't know how to alleviate. While Martin struggled with his emotions, Liev and Bram were distracted by other objects in the room. They found dusty letters with old dates, revealing that the mansion's family had faced similar tragedies. Liev, with one of the letters in hand, began to read aloud. The story of a daughter who disappeared under mysterious circumstances echoed throughout the room, and Liev couldn't help but wonder if the mansion really harbored ghosts or if they were just echoes of pain that never dissipated. Each word seemed to weave a connection between past and present, as if grief were an invisible line linking their lives. Martin, still absorbed in his own pain, began to hear the voices of the others. The stories that Liev and Bram shared about their losses became a reminder that they were not alone. The connection between them grew stronger, but the urgency to confront their own ghosts also grew. As they left the room of mirrors, the trio once again faced the door of the sealed room, now with a sense of urgency. What else could be hidden there? Curiosity mingled with fear, but the need for answers was greater. Martin, still struggling with his emotions, tried to convince his friends to go home, but Liev and Bram insisted they should discover the complete truth. They gathered in front of the door and with a joint effort decided to open the sealed room again. The expectation was palpable, and as they entered the room, they were greeted by an unexpected scene. A table covered with personal objects, including the doll that Liev had found earlier. In the center of the table, an open diary revealed that the family's missing daughter was Martin's mother. The shock was so intense that Martin felt as if the ground beneath his feet was giving way. He realized that the pain he faced was intertwined with the mansion's history. Each tear he had shed, each moment of sadness, was not just his own, but part of a collective grief that spanned generations. The revelation that his own pain was connected to that abandoned house made him understand that the true nature of grief was not just a personal matter, but an echo of untold stories. With the revelation, the mansion was not just a place of pain, but a labyrinth of memories that were never fully lived. Martin realized that in trying to seek answers, he had ended up facing a fate that could not be changed. He realized that the true pain of grief was accepting that some memories would never be overcome, and that even amid the darkness, there was a light that could be found in the connection they shared.